Most fans think they already know the story of how Deftones got its name. They've heard rumors for years. Some say it came from a slang word, others say it was inspired by old-school funk, and many believe the band simply thought it sounded cool. But one day, during a quiet backstage interview, Chino Moreno sat down, smiled, and said something that shocked everyone. "That's not how you spell it, and that's not how we came up with it." The interviewer froze. Nobody expected Chino to open up like that. For years, the band had avoided explaining the name. It was mysterious, stylish, and slightly confusing. And that was exactly why people loved it. Chino leaned forward and said, "Let me tell you the real story. People always get it wrong." This was the moment fans had waited decades for. Not a myth, not a rumor, not a guess, but the real truth. Straight from the man who helped create one of the most iconic band names of the 90s. And as he spoke, he revealed that the name almost wasn't Deftones. In fact, the original version looked completely different. And yes, it was spelled wrong. But the spelling mistake turned into something legendary. And the surprising part? It wasn't even meant to sound heavy, dark, or metal. Chino laughed as he got ready to tell the full story. "It started as a total joke," he said. But that joke would end up shaping the identity of the band forever. Before Deftones was Deftones, they were just a group of kids in Sacramento who loved music more than anything. The band wasn't polished. They didn't have a studio. They didn't have a plan. They had a dusty garage, cheap gear, and the loudest dreams in the neighborhood. Chino remembers those days clearly. "We were just messing around," he said. "We didn't know we were building something real." The group spent hours after school making noise, literally noise. Sometimes it was chaotic, sometimes it was brilliant. But it was always the highlight of their day. Naming the band wasn't even on their mind at first. They were still trying to figure out how to play together without blowing up an amp. But every great band reaches the point where someone finally asks, "So, what do we call ourselves?" And for Chino and the guys, that question appeared sooner than they expected. At first, they threw around names that sounded cool to teenagers, but terrible to adults. Some were too dark, some too silly, and some were simply embarrassing. But the moment they discovered the word that would eventually become Deftones, everything changed. The name didn't come from a deep meaning or a long story. It came from a funny, clumsy moment in that same dusty garage, but none of them knew the word would stick. And they definitely didn't know it would someday be printed on millions of posters, shirts, and albums around the world. It all started with an innocent mistake, one that Chino still laughs about today. One late afternoon, while the band was taking a break, someone brought in an old magazine. It was full of photos of musicians from the 50s and 60s, the kind of artists who wore suits on stage and had sharp, vintage style. Chino always loved that look. "Those guys were smooth," he said. There was one word in the magazine that kept catching his eye: deaf. It was old slang for cool, sharp, or stylish. Hip-hop culture used it a lot. It sounded bold and punchy. Chino said, "We thought that word was dope. It had attitude." Another friend tossed out the idea of combining it with something else, something more musical, something that sounded like a group. That's when someone suggested adding tones, Deftones. At first, the room went quiet. Then someone laughed. Then someone else said, "Actually, it kinda sounds cool." It wasn't deep, it wasn't poetic, it was just spontaneous, and it fit their vibe. But there was a problem. When they tried to write it down on paper, nobody agreed on the spelling. "Deftones? Deftones? Deftones?" Chino said, "We spelled it wrong the first time. That's how we ended up with Deftones. But when we looked at it, it actually looked better." Suddenly, the mistake became the final version. They didn't fix it. They didn't change it. They embraced it, because sometimes the imperfect version hits the spot better than the correct one. And this accidental spelling would soon become one of the most recognizable band names in alternative rock. When the guys showed the name Deftones to their friends, they expected to be roasted. After all, they knew the spelling wasn't exactly proper. But something weird happened. People stared at it for a second, then nodded their heads. "It looks cool," someone said. And they were right. The mistake gave the word a unique twist, enough to make it stand out. Chino explained it, like this. If we spelled it the normal way, it would have looked basic, a little boring. But Deftones? That felt like our sound. Familiar, but not really. The more they looked at it, the more they loved it. The word felt smooth and sharp at the same time. It had rhythm, it had style. It didn't look metal, punk, or hardcore. It just looked like them. They didn't want a name that forced them into a genre. They didn't want something that sounded too aggressive or too clean. Deftones gave them freedom. It was a word you couldn't completely place, just like their music. Heavy but dreamy, loud but emotional, raw but artistic. And that unique spelling, it became part of the band's identity before they even released a demo. Chino said, "We were just kids. We didn't know anything about branding, but looking back, that misspelling saved us." The name was original. It didn't look like anyone else, and in a world filled with bands trying to sound alike, that mattered more than anything. Chino remembers the first small gig they ever played under the name Deftones. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't loud, it wasn't packed. It was a tiny community show with a handful of people and a makeshift stage. A friend working the event asked the band what name he should write on the flyer. "Just put Deftones," Chino said casually. The moment felt simple, but it marked the official birth of the band. Seeing the name printed, even on a cheap black and white flyer, made it feel real. It was like seeing your name on your first school assignment, Chino joked. Suddenly you go, "That's me." When the band took the stage and introduced themselves as Deftones for the first time, something clicked. People weren't confused. People weren't laughing. People liked it. That night wasn't about fame. It wasn't about money. It was about identity. The band finally felt like a real unit, something with a title and a future. The name stuck on their amps. It stuck on their tapes. It stuck in their minds. And from that small night in Sacramento, Deftones started spreading. From school to school, neighborhood to neighborhood. A misspelled word scribbled in a garage had suddenly turned into something that felt alive. Chino didn't know it at the time, but that little moment would help carry them into the mainstream years later. As the band grew older and more serious, there came a moment when they questioned everything, including the name. At one point, a local promoter suggested they should rebrand before recording their early demos. He said the name didn't sound heavy enough. He said it sounded too soft. He even suggested darker, more aggressive options. The guys sat in a room and talked it out. They debated for hours. Should they stay Deftones, or should they become something more intense, something that matched the rising metal and hardcore? Scenes in California? Chino said he almost gave in. "We were young. We thought maybe we needed a tougher name to fit in." But then someone made a point that stopped everything. If we change our name, then we're just like everybody else. And just like that, the debate ended. The name stayed, because it wasn't meant to fit in, it was meant to stand out. And years later, when the band finally signed to a major label, the executives told them the same thing. "It's good you didn't change it, this name is different." Chino now laughs at the thought of what might have happened. If we had changed it, we wouldn't feel like Deftones anymore. The identity they built, the sound, the style, the vibe, was tied to that one accidental word, and it was too late to turn back. Over time, Chino began to realize something surprising. The name didn't just describe the band, it influenced what the band became. Deftones sounded smooth, stylish, and mysterious. It didn't force them into a single genre. They could be heavy one minute and dreamy the next. They could scream, whisper, float, crash, all under the same name. Chino said that freedom shaped their sound more than people know. "We never felt trapped. The name didn't tell people what to expect, so we experimented." While other bands struggled to break out of their labels, Deftones evolved naturally. The music didn't need to prove anything. It just needed to feel right, and fans loved that. Every album sounded different, yet still unmistakably like them. This identity, born from a misspelling, became one of the band's strongest foundations. It let them blend metal, shoegaze, alternative, electronic, and even hip-hop elements without losing who they were. Chino believes that if they had chosen a more typical metal name, they might never have created albums like White Pony, one of the most groundbreaking in alternative metal history. The name opened doors, not with the industry, but inside the band. It told them, be anything, create anything, sound like yourselves. And that freedom changed everything. As Deftones grew bigger and their music spread around the world, fans became curious. Interviews, forums, letters, meet and greets, everywhere they went, someone asked the same question. What does Deftones mean? Some thought it was a rare slang word. Some thought it meant sharp tones or skilled sounds. Some thought it had a deep spiritual meaning. Others insisted the band picked it because it looked futuristic, but no matter how many theories appeared, the band never gave a full answer. They would smile, tease, or dodge the question entirely. Chino often joked, "We're not even sure ourselves anymore," and that mystery only made fans more obsessed. Every album release restarted the debate. Every interview brought new guesses. But Chino always knew the truth was embarrassingly simple. A mix of old slang, a random suggestion, and a spelling mistake. For years, he kept the real story quiet, partly because it wasn't glamorous, and partly because he enjoyed the mystery. Sometimes the simplest stories are the most fun to keep secret, he said. But eventually, fans would get their answer, straight from Chino himself. After decades of rumors, Chino finally sat down one day and decided to tell the truth. The interviewer asked the question again. "So, how did you get the name?" Chino smiled, leaned back and said, "Okay, here's the real version." He explained everything: the magazine, the slang word def, the joking suggestion of tones, and the moment when someone spelled the name wrong on paper. "That's not how you spell it," he remembered saying. But the guys looked at it and said, "Actually, it looks better." Chino laughed as he told the story. "We weren't deep. We were kids. It just sounded cool to us." The interviewer was stunned. Fans watching the video were stunned. The truth was so casual, so honest, and so unexpectedly funny that it instantly became one of the most shared Deftones stories online. No symbolism, no secret meaning. Just a group of teens having fun and creating one of the most iconic names in alternative rock history by accident. But the simple story didn't ruin anything. In fact, it made the name even more legendary because it reminded fans that the best things in life don't always come from a master plan. Sometimes they come from messing around with your friends in a garage. When the interview went viral, fans exploded with reactions. Some laughed, some were shocked, some said, "I knew it," and some said they preferred the mystery. But the majority loved the story because it felt real and human. Just like the band itself. Memes appeared everywhere. People started writing "that's not how you spell it" on fan art and comments. Others joked about what the band might have been called if the spelling error never happened. But something else happened too. Fans appreciated the honesty. For years, Deftones had been seen as mysterious, dark, and artistic, almost untouchable. This story made them feel closer, more human, more like the kids in the garage they once were. People loved knowing that a mistake could become iconic. They loved that the name wasn't carefully engineered or chosen for marketing. It was authentic, just like the music. Even longtime fans said they respected the band more after hearing the real story. And Chino, he loved the reactions. "I'm glad people finally know," he said. "It feels good to share it." The truth didn't weaken the myth. It strengthened it. Because it connected fans to the heart of the band, not through mystery, but through honesty. Today, Deftones is more than a name. It's a brand, a culture, a sound, and a history. It represents evolution, creativity, and emotional depth. It stands for a band that refuses to be boxed into any one style. But it all began with a joke, a magazine, and a spelling mistake. Chin now says the misspelling is one of the best accidents in his life. "It fits us," he said. "It always did." The name allowed them to grow without limits. It let them sound heavy, soft, experimental, emotional, whatever they wanted. It became a symbol of freedom instead of a label. And decades later, it still looks as sharp and stylish as the first time it was written on a flyer. Most bands choose a name to fit in. Deftones chose a name that made them stand out, even if they didn't mean to. That small accident shaped their identity, their music, and their legacy. And now fans around the world know the truth behind the word they've shouted, worn, and loved for more than 30 years. A word born from a garage, a mistake turned into magic, and a story that proves the most iconic things can come from the simplest moments. Chino Moreno summed it up perfectly. We didn't spell it right, but it turned out perfect anyway.